The hot stove heating up at day 2 of the winter meetings. And while the Orioles didn't make a signing yet, a reported offer that might be the longest and biggest they've ever made under Mike Elias. We'll talk about it coming up on this live episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Tuesday, December 9th, 2025, and welcome back in to the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we're going to talk about the news and notes from day 2 of the MLB Winter Meetings down in Orlando, Florida. Kyle Schwarber, unfortunately, did not sign with the Orioles as he, as many expected, is heading back to Philly on a 5-year deal. What we didn't expect is that the O's were right in it until the end. We'll talk about that. The continued interest in other hitters and pitchers, some more potential trade targets, the draft lottery, and of course, we'll be taking your mailbag questions at the end of the show. So make sure to put them right here in the YouTube comments if you are watching live. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast, now part of the #1 sports podcast network. And this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. If you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long. So we got to start with really the big news of the day out of the winter meetings. And unfortunately, that news is not that the Orioles have made a signing. However, that news is the Orioles reportedly have made what, at least what we know publicly, is the longest term offer they've made to a free agent since Mike Elias took over. The big signing of the day is Kyle Schwarber, to really no surprise, is re-signing with the Philadelphia Phillies for a reported 5 years and $150 million. That's $30 million per year. But Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic reported on Tuesday that the Orioles actually made the same offer to Schwarber. Their final offer was also 5 years and $150 million. And the reports from Ken were that the Orioles actually made that offer first. Schwarber took it back to the Phillies, asked them to match it. They did, and he ended up signing back in Philadelphia. Now, if you read the story from Rosenthal on Tuesday, basically the reporting is, hey, the Phillies really wanted Schwarber back. Schwarber wanted to re-sign in Philly, but he also wanted a long-term commitment. It seemed like the Phillies maybe weren't willing to go past 4 years. As soon as the Orioles were, well, that's when the Phillies jumped in and matched the offer. You know, at some point, for the Orioles, there comes a breaking point, and I'm guessing going anywhere beyond 5 years or $150 million for a DH who's about to be 33 years old in March, that was probably the breaking point for them. And that is understandable, right? You're going to be paying this guy $30 million a year until he's, into his late 30s, and he already really doesn't play the field at all. Like, he played, 5 or 6 games in the outfield in 2025 for Philly. He's basically a full-time DH. But it's nice to know the Orioles are willing to do that. And again, like I've talked about it every time I've talked about the O's being linked to Kyle Schwarber on this show, that I thought, and most people thought, he's going to find his way back to the Phillies. The Phillies want him back. He wants to be in Philadelphia. They're not going to let him walk unless it's an absolutely absurd type of offer. And the Phillies were able to match it. And, I saw a comment here already as I'm recording live, saying this from Recon. If we offered 180, they would match. That's probably true. Like maybe if it went over 200 million, the Phillies would rethink it a little bit. But at this point, the Phillies were going to match whatever. But as far as we know, this is the first time Mike Elias has offered a 5-year contract to a free agent. We know his offer was 4 years and $180 million to Corbin Burns last offseason when he took the 6 years and $210 to play at home with the Diamondbacks. So it's not the most money they've offered, because obviously Schwarber at 150 and Burns at 180. But it really does show that the Orioles are here to play this offseason. They had matched for the best offer out there. Rosenthal reported the Pirates offer was 4 years for 120. The Reds offer was 5 years for 125. but Schwarber ends up going back to Philly. And it's kind of shocking that the Orioles made that offer to any player, let alone a DH who's about to be 33. Now, Kyle Schwarber is a special hitter, and that's why I would have been fine if he took the Orioles offer and signed here for 5 years and 150. Would have given you a bopper in the middle of your lineup for the next 5 years. There's some good articles going around about how, Schwarber might be able to age more like Nelson Cruz and still be a good power hitter into his late 30s, which would make this deal still look good at the end. But this really does show that the O's are here. And at this point I'm not going to go to the word shocked, but very, very surprised if the Orioles don't sign a big money free agent at some point this offseason. Usually when teams are throwing around this much money, someone good is going to take it. Now, whether the Orioles have to pay an extra fee to get guys to come play in Baltimore, whether that's fair is kind of a different conversation that I certainly have thoughts on. But the Orioles are very clearly willing to give out these contracts. And for everyone who, despite reporting, has decided to not believe that the O's are willing to go long-term. I mean, maybe that's the case in the past. Maybe how bad 2025 was really did kick Mike Elias and David Rubenstein into gear. That kind of seems to be what's happening. They're real players. Andy Kuska of the Baltimore Banner reporting that the Orioles are now pivoting to Pete Alonso. We know they're meeting with him this week in person at the winter meetings. There were some reports out of Mets land from Mark Feinsand that the Mets may not be willing to go more than 3 years on a Pete Alonso deal. Ken Rosenthal also reporting that the Orioles are, quote, talking to virtually every player at the top of the market besides Alec Bregman and Bo Bichette, saying that because they are infielders don't really fit with the Orioles right now. But Ken Rosenthal specifically named Kyle Tucker, Pete Alonso, Framber Valdez, and Ranger Suarez as guys the Orioles are talking with in free agency right now. Now, are they going to sign any of those 4 guys? Who knows? You're going to have to overpay a little bit than other teams. You're going to have to really convince them that, 2025 was a blip and this team's going to be back on track, with your help in 2026. But they're playing at a point in free agency that they've just not played, honestly, since the 90s, right? Since Peter Angelos was running a top 3 payroll in baseball there for a couple of years, and the Orioles, went back-to-back ALCSs in 96 and 97. That's the last time, comparatively to the rest of the league, we've seen the Orioles spend anything close to being like a top 5 payroll team, right? They were sneaking towards the top 10 in the middle of those Buck years, but this could be different. Giving out contracts to free agents like this is just not something they've done since the late 90s. My prediction, honestly, I think they're going to get one of the top 4 pitchers, and I think there's a better chance than I ever would have thought that Pete Alonso is a Baltimore Oriole in 2026. It's crazy to think, going into this offseason, it was pitching, and that's still the focus. But I think it could be a big pitcher and a big hitter that comes in free agency. Speaking of pitching, the other big deal at the winter meetings today was Edwin Diaz, the number 1 closer on the market. We know the Orioles at least had some interest in him as they went to sign a closer, ended up giving Ryan Helsley a 2-year, $28 million deal to come to Baltimore. But Edwin Diaz not going back to the Mets, signing a 3-year, $69 million contract with the Dodgers. That is the most average annual value, $23 million per year, that a reliever has ever gotten in the free agent market. I don't think the Orioles were ever going to pay Edwin Diaz, right? They get Helsley for $9 million less per year. Relievers, even Edwin Diaz, who's been the best closer in baseball for a couple of years, they're so volatile. I mean, Diaz has had his own bad times. I'd rather give a little less money to a guy who has the ceiling similar to Diaz, like Helsley, with all the stuff and how good he was prior to 2025. Now, the Mets kind of already signed his replacement in Devin Williams, but it's kind of surprising Diaz only got 3 years, especially after he opted out of a few more years of big money in that Mets contract. Maybe the O's could have had him, but you also have to compete with a guy wanting to play for the Dodgers, and this kind of being the only real opening in the Dodgers roster right now is for a big-time closer, and they went and got that in Edwin Diaz. Looking at these contracts, I feel pretty good still about the Ryan Helsley deal for the Orioles. And then probably the last piece of news to talk about from the day that, truly concerns the Orioles is probably the fact that David Peterson is potentially available via trade. There's a report from Tim Britton and Will Salmon, who partially cover the Mets at The Athletic, that the Mets are willing to entertain offers on starting pitcher David Peterson. He's 30 years old. He'll be a rental. He's a free agent after 2026. He's projected to make about $7.6 million in arbitration this season via MLB trade rumors. Now, the Orioles, according to people I've talked to, have tried to make a David Peterson trade in the past. There was some talks surrounding Ramon Arias for David Peterson as kind of headliners for a trade a few years ago before Peterson really kind of solidified himself in the Mets rotation. This was back when he was kind of a younger, somewhat unproven swingman. That trade never went down, obviously, but he's had some shoulder issues, some side issues. He had a major hip issue a couple years ago, but he finally got healthy this season. He made 30 starts. It was a 4.22 ERA and a career high 168 and 2/3 innings. He was really the only reliable starter in the Mets rotation for the entire year. And he did fall off at the end of the season. David Peterson did, but he was an all-star for the Mets this year. And again, you look at a 4.22 ERA for a whole body of work and you're like, it's not amazing. Well, it comes with a 3.48 FIP. Like, there was clearly some bad luck here. His, FIP was almost a run lower than his ERA. It was a good season for David Peterson, right? The strikeouts went up a little bit from last year. The walks stayed around the same. He upped his ground ball rate. He is a big-time ground ball pitcher, gets a lot of extension down the mound. But you kind of look at how his season played out. It was a 3.06 ERA in the first half and a 6.34 in the second half. That's really where things fell apart. It was a 6.68 ERA in August and a 9.72 in September. But for the first 4 months of the season, Peterson was locked down for the Mets. And, Peterson would not be the guy you bring in to be, put at the top of your rotation with Kyle Bradish and Trevor Rogers. But again, as I talked about yesterday with Nick Pivetta, I'd put David Peterson a step down from Nick Pivetta. But if if David Peterson is the second best starting pitcher you acquire this offseason, like you trade for Peterson, you also go and sign, someone like Imai or Framber Valdez, that's a really good offseason. Peterson would fit in pretty perfectly in probably the number 4 spot in this rotation. Imagine a Kyle Bradish, Framber Valdez, Trevor Rogers, David Peterson, Dean Kramer rotation. Like, that looks great to me heading into 2026. And knowing that he's someone the Orioles have targeted in the past under Mike Elias makes me think if they have a chance to get him even cheaper now with just 1 year left, it's something they could go and do if they could get a deal done potentially with the Mets. Those are the big moves that have been made to this point on day 2 at around, what are we at, 8:12 p.m. Eastern time here on Tuesday. But let's talk about some other Orioles news from Tuesday. Some draft lottery stuff, some WBC stuff. That is coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by FanDuel. Now, NFL Sundays, they move fast. One big play and suddenly everything feels different. That's what makes live betting with FanDuel so exciting. You're not just watching the game, you're reacting to it in real time. With FanDuel, you can place bets as the action unfolds. Every drive, every momentum swing, every highlight moment. And live betting is best when the game starts to shift. A receiver gets hot, a defense tightens up, or the momentum flips after a turnover. And FanDuel lets you jump into the moment, live spreads and money lines that adjust instantly, and player props update as guys heat up. So if you want to be right in the middle of the action this season, visit FanDuel.com and place your NFL live bets all season long at FanDuel. The game moves fast, and so can you. So before we get to some MLB Draft Lottery stuff here on this live episode on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page, thank you for tuning in. Want to thank you all for making Locked On Orioles your first listen of the day, and thanks for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. Now, you already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free. Join the Everydayer Club today and get Locked On Orioles with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more. All for just $5 per month, or to save a little money, $50 per year. Go to lockedonorioles.supercast.com. Again, that is lockedonorioles.supercast.com, or check the link that'll be here in the show notes to learn more about joining the Everydayer Club. Again, you can get ad-free episodes of the Locked On Orioles podcast. You can get into our Discord to talk Orioles with me and other O's fans. It's going to be a fun time if you are interested. Again, that is the Everydayer dayer club. So let's talk about the MLB Draft Lottery. Something that was instituted a couple of years ago to be an anti-tanking measure for teams, trying to get teams to stop tanking. And it's what the NBA has done for a while. It's what the NHL has done for a while. And the Orioles, they had the 7th worst record last season. But in the lottery, they had the 4th best odds to get the number 1 pick because there were some teams ahead of them, like the Angels and the Rockies and the Nats, who were uneligible to pick in the top 10 because they had picked so high for so many years. There are rules now where you can't pick in the top 10 for so many years in a row. So the O's had a good chance. And unfortunately, the ping pong balls did not bounce their way. They ended up getting the number 7 pick in the draft. Now, it's kind of a ball don't lie moment because, again, they finished with the 7th worst record and they got the 7th pick. So that's how it would have been done in the past. Just a little disappointing when they had a chance to get potentially that number 1 pick. Now, 7th will be their highest pick, of course, since taking Jackson Holliday number 1 in 2022. And if you take some early looks at some draft places, Baseball America's top 100 draft prospects from back in October, they had, Florida's right-handed pitcher Liam Peterson, maybe the best college pitcher in the draft this year. Alabama shortstop Justin LeBron, super exciting player. Virginia outfielder A.J. Gracia, big, crazy power left-handed hitter. Texas A&M shortstop and Maryland transfer Chris Hakopian, who's a local kid who's got some incredible power, great ball player. Just would love to see him in the O system. Baseball America did put up a mock draft already right after the draft lottery, had the Orioles taking TCU left-handed hitting outfielder Sawyer Strasnider with the 7th pick. He slashed 350, 420, 650 as a freshman. He's kind of a tooled-up, draft-eligible sophomore player. Our friend Joe Doyle over at Overslot also did a mock draft. He had the Orioles taking Virginia shortstop Eric Becker. And it looks like the O's are either going to have pick number 33 or 34 in the competitive balance round after the first round as well. Baseball America mocks them to Gavin Grahovic, who had an incredible freshman year, then had shoulder surgery last year. Like coming into the season, he was seen as a Golden Spikes potential candidate. Got shoulder surgery. Now he's back for his junior year. The health is a question, but the talent is immense. Joe has the Orioles taking high school third baseman Bo Peterson with that pick as well. So maybe not exactly what we wanted out of that draft lottery, right? Would have been pretty awesome to have the Orioles spending all this money, getting back into it, and getting the number 1 pick or up there in that top 5. But hey, number 7, still a higher draft pool than they've been used to the past couple of years. We know Mike Elias has done well in taking advantage of the draft. Hopefully he can do that again in 2026. Other pieces of news from the day, we did get some World Baseball Classic announcements, and the most exciting one is that Gunnar Henderson is going to play for Team USA at the 2026 World Baseball Classic coming up in February. It was an awesome event 3 years ago. It should be awesome again this season. Now, right now, he would probably slot in to play third base with Bobby Witt Jr. at shortstop for Team USA, but they've only announced 8 total position players who are on the team. So again, they're going to have 5, 6, 7 more of them. So guys will get shuffled around. But if he is a starter, that would be awesome to see him play in some of these games. Now, Gunnar has had, some sort of side or oblique issue in each of the last 2 spring trainings. 2024, it shut him down for a week or so. Last year, it caused him to miss the first week of the season on the injured list. So obviously, if that's something that comes up again in 2026, he's not going to play in the WBC. But otherwise, he is committed. He's going to play for Team USA. He's one of the best players in baseball, even coming off a little bit of a down year. It is going to be awesome to see him in the WBC. In terms of other Orioles, Rico Garcia, as Rock Kabako reported on Tuesday, is on the preliminary roster for Team Puerto Rico. That doesn't confirm he'll be on the team, but after kind of showing out with the Mets and then the Orioles last year, maybe a chance for him to get in the WBC. I would assume we'll see Dean Kramer pitch for Team Israel again. He did it in the last WBC, was kind of the ace of that staff. And then, O's pitching prospect, Ryan Long, pitched for Great Britain last time, actually struck out Mike Trout when Great Britain played Team USA. You'll probably see a few prospects floating around on some teams as well. Was trying to see if any other main roster Orioles guys would get called in. It's probably not going to be Adley. They've already got Cal Raleigh and Will Smith on the roster as catchers for Team USA. Maybe somebody they would sign this offseason could get added to a team like Pete Alonso or one of the pitchers. If they signed Imai, I'm sure he'd love to play for Samurai Japan. So that's a possibility for the Orioles and the WBC as well. But we do know for sure we'll get to watch Gunnar Henderson out there, which the WBC is already just an incredible event. So to get to see Gunnar out there makes it even better. All right, we got one final segment coming up on the show, unless the Orioles make a roster move in the next 15 minutes or so. I'm taking your mailbag questions. So if you have questions about the Orioles winter meetings, offseason, whatever it may be, put them right here live in the Locked On Orioles YouTube chat, and I'll get to those questions coming up right after this. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is also brought to you by Gametime. The World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994. And with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Gametime app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Gametime, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands. It makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. All you got to do is pick a game, maybe in your area or a team or a country you want to go see play, tap a section, and you have your tickets locked in within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for the fine print, and the prices include the fees up front, which I love. No last-second surprises at checkout. So take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Gametime. So before we get to your mailbag questions, I want to tell you about something else fun coming up on the Locked On Orioles podcast here. We talked about the Everydayer Club and the way that you can get involved, but did Locked On Orioles make your Spotify Wrapped or even your YouTube Wrapped as well? Prove it on social media to secure a free month of our brand new Everydayer Club. Just tag our national Locked On Podcast Network account on any social platform, and we'll drop you a code. Be one of the first to join the Everydayer Club to get your favorite show ad-free, that is Locked On Orioles, and exclusive access to the members-only Locked On Orioles Discord channel. All you got to do is prove it on social media. Did Locked On Orioles end up in your Spotify Wrapped? Always love to see those as well. Some people showing me just absurd numbers of minutes that they have listened to my voice this season and this year. I hope you're not tired of me at this point. All right, let's open up the mailbag here. Live episode here on Winter Meetings Day 2. Going to get to some questions that came in via email and some ones I didn't get to last night, and then get to your mailbag questions that are here in the YouTube comments. First, a question from Daniel via email who asks, any good super utility guys who can act as our third catcher but can provide value at other positions as well? Daniel says the one guy I can think of is IKF. Now, there's not a lot of these guys out there. IKF, Isaiah Kiner-Falefa, is certainly one of them. Now, he has not caught a big league game since 2019 with the Rangers, but he did start behind the dish 66 times from 2018 to 19 with Texas. Since then, he's been an infielder and an outfielder, but no catching. MJ Melendez, who is a free agent this year after being with the Royals for a while, he's been converted to the outfield lately and has kind of fallen off with Kansas City, but he did catch 65 big league games in 2022 and 7 more in 2023, so potentially someone who could do it. Otherwise, there's probably like some minor league free agents I don't really know about. Kyle Schwarber caught 1 inning in 2019. He was a catcher before that with the Cubs. Of course, he's no longer available. And Taylor Ward did come up as a catcher and did catch 2 big league innings back in 2021. He's more than likely the emergency catcher on the roster at this point, but not a lot of great options if you want to sign somebody who can also kind of be your third catcher and be a utility guy. Question from Mark via email. What are the chances Ryan O'Hearn returns to the Orioles in 2026? Of course, O'Hearn traded to the Padres at the deadline, is now a free agent again. I'd say the chances are small, but not zero. At this point, there's just so many kind of first base, outfield, DH bats on the roster. Taylor Ward, Tyler O'Neill, you're looking at Ryan Mountcastle and Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basayo in the mix. And, is Heston Kjerstad going to reemerge on this roster at any point? There's just not a great fit for him, but Schwarber already signed. If Pete Alonso does sign elsewhere and maybe they trade, Mayo or Mountcastle for pitching, I'd be fine at that point bringing O'Hearn back. I really love Ryan O'Hearn. I think he brings a lot of great stuff to this lineup. at that point, aren't you just running it back? And it seems like the Orioles aren't content at this point with just running it back. Got a couple questions from yesterday's YouTube chat that I didn't get to on the live show. First one is from Wayman yesterday, who said, any AAA guys you're looking forward to watching in 2026? I'll kind of pair this with a question we have in the chat right now from Thomas, who says, which prospects are you most excited to see this year who hasn't made their debut yet? I'll give you 5 players in AAA. Tyson Neighbors, super exciting reliever, came over at the deadline last year. He was in AA, but he'll probably be in Norfolk this year. Anthony Nunez, another reliever who was added to the 40-man roster, who will be in AAA and could pitch in the big leagues for the Orioles, but probably won't be on the opening day roster. So I'll be intrigued to see how he looks at the beginning of the season. I'd say Trey Gibson, Orioles top pitching prospect, top 100 pitching prospect. Can he look good enough to potentially help the Orioles next year if they need him? And then, of course, I'm just so intrigued to see what Enrique Bradfield Jr. is going to look like in kind of his first full season run in AAA, being just one step away from the big leagues. Will he look good enough where the O's could stick him in center field in the big leagues in 2027? I think that's the big question for Bradfield. How does the bat hold up against better and better pitching? And the last one would be Peyton Eales, who is the kind of utility infielder who the Orioles got back from the Twins when they traded away Alex Jackson earlier this offseason. Doesn't strike out, gets on base, slap hitter, small guy, but a little more pop than you think. He's had some really good numbers in AAA with the Twins. I'm really intrigued to see what he looks like in Norfolk and if he can help the O's. And then also from Too Powerful 23 on YouTube yesterday, do you think the Orioles would be okay with parting with major league players in trades, like guys like Jordan Westberg or Colton Cowser? Honestly, at the beginning of the offseason, I probably would have said it's possible, but a pretty low chance. And then the Orioles made the Grayson Rodriguez for Taylor Ward trade, and then they've, given out a 5-year, $150 million offer to Kyle Schwarber. And at this point, it kind of feels like the Orioles are willing to make any move they think will make them better and help them get back to the postseason in 2026. So if they dealt Cowser to get a pitcher, they try and go get Brenton Doyle or Jake Myers to replace him in center. If they dealt Westberg for a big-time ace, they, try to go sign Alex Bregman and just fill in third base right there. They would be willing to do, it feels like, a lot of things to make this team better in 2026. All right, if you do have questions here, you're watching live on the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel, make sure to throw those in the chat. Going to get to a few questions here before we finish off this live episode after day 2 of the winter meetings. Finally, actually got some moves here on day number 2, not by the Orioles just yet, but still surprising that they made such an offer of 5 years, $150. Here's a pretty straightforward one from Blue Crabs 8. Do you think the Orioles will sign Kyle Tucker? I don't, but they are still being connected to him, and the money they're throwing around and the connection he has with Mike Elias, of course, helped to draft him back in Houston. It's certainly possible. I think it's way more likely they get someone like Pete Alonso, but I would have thought it was crazy a month ago, and now I'm like, if the market falls to the Orioles, it could absolutely happen to go and get someone like Kyle Tucker. Let's see. Question here. How long do you think it takes for the Orioles to get deals done with a hitter and a pitcher? I will say it's possible one of them gets done during the winter meetings, and hopefully it does. But a lot of times, there are a lot of deals generally that happen like physically at the winter meetings, but also a lot of the relationships built, conversations started, seeds are planted for the rest of the offseason at the winter meetings. So all the deals don't necessarily get done in this week, but the conversations begin and then kind of go from there. Question from Robert here. Would the Orioles make a similar deal to Pete Alonso, assuming you mean for the Kyle Schwarber one, maybe 4 years, $125 million to bump his AAV? I think if they're willing to give 5 years, $150 to a 33-year-old Schwarber. Now, granted, Alonso is not as good a hitter at this point as Kyle Schwarber and may not age as well as Schwarber, but he is also 2 years younger. So I think they'd be willing to give 4 years, $125 to Alonso if they're willing to dish out 5 years for $150 for Schwarber. If they like Alonso, if they think he'll make the team a lot better, if that's what it takes, I think they'd be willing to go with a deal like that. Let's see any other questions we've got here in the chat before we get going. Let's see. Do we have any more questions? Making some fantastic radio here. And I think that may be it in terms of the questions in the chat. So again, last chance to throw some in. If not, Thank you so much for tuning into another live episode. The plan is to around 8 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday night, at least go live one more time for Winter Meetings Night 3. We'll talk about the news from the day on Wednesday and definitely answer some mailbag questions on Wednesday night as well. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel while you are here. And also make sure to follow the show, subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really helps us out as well. And remember, if you're interested, the Everydayer Club, just $5 per month, $50 per year. You get ad-free episodes and access to that Locked On Orioles Discord. We're chatting O's all the time in that Discord. So make sure if you're interested, definitely a cool opportunity. But we'll still have the free shows with the ads out here on YouTube and right here wherever you listen, 5 days a week. That is ending this week as well. We will go back down to 3 days a week starting next week until spring training, but still plenty of Orioles content coming up here at Locked On Orioles. Maybe let's see. Do we have a couple more questions here? Let's see. We got one from Nick. Let's see. Can we get Nick's deal up here? There we go. How much are you willing to overlook the Fromber switch-up situation last year to get him, and what do you think he signs for if it's Baltimore? I think teams, we know the Orioles met with Fromber at the GM meetings. I'm sure they're meeting with him, talking with his agents again. I think a team would have to feel really confident about kind of the makeup of Fromber Valdez. And because this Mike Elias team was the team that signed him internationally with the Astros, they may know him better than anyone. So I would be willing to overlook it if the Orioles are, essentially. Because if the O's are going to give out finally a big-time years, big money deal to a free agent starting pitcher, they would have to make sure that starting pitcher is not going to blow up the entire chemistry of the clubhouse. And so if they're going to sign him for that much money in years, which is probably going to be 6 years, 180, 190, maybe even 200 million, they're going to feel confident that whatever is going on in there is going to be okay. That'll do it for today's episode. Let's see. Oh, okay. We got to do one more question here because this is podcast specific. With the 3 episodes per week, will you be returning to the player year in reviews? Yes, I will. As we get through the winter meetings, we'll go back to kind of reviewing every player's season and, of course, keep you updated on all the news and notes. And that comes back on tomorrow's live show right around 8 p.m. Eastern. Join me right back here on the Locked On Orioles YouTube page. Until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.